Quarterly, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Lesson 4, Joshua 13, Dividing the Land. The first 11 chapters of Joshua record for us the conquest of the land, culminating in the declaration, "And the land had rest from war," Joshua 11:23. Of course, as we'll see in the book of Judges, that was not the whole story. If Joshua had been able to give the people lasting rest, there would be no need for the coming of Jesus, Hebrews 4:8. But the point was that the Lord had fulfilled everything he promised Moses. Now it was time to begin distributing the land. Joshua 13 begins that process with reminders of the Lord's faithfulness, as Joshua's increasing age raises questions about who will succeed him when he dies. Joshua 13:1. There are also the first hints of the incompleteness of the conquest. In spite of God's faithfulness and the general success of Joshua's campaigns, there is still much territory that needs to be captured. Joshua 13:13. Even though Joshua accomplished rest for the people, it was still possible for them to fail and fall short of entering that rest. It's not coincidental that as we move into the section of the book that deals with the distribution of the land, the first question addressed is the leadership issue. Joshua was growing advanced in years, Joshua 13:1, a statement emphasized by repetition. And though the vast preponderance of the promised land had at least been opened up, if not actually occupied, there remained additional territory to be taken. Who would ensure that the presently unoccupied land would finally be won? And the answer is, of course, the Lord. Chapter 13, verse 6. Human leaders come and go, but the Lord's promise stands forever. In the book of Judges, we learn that there was no comparable leader to replace Joshua. And so the drive towards completion of the conquest faltered, not because of any failing on the Lord's part, but because of a lack of faithfulness in the next generation of the people. See Judges 1. Even at the heights of the empires of David and Solomon, Israel never controlled the whole of the area whose boundaries are described here. Some interpreters therefore project the fulfillment of this promise into a supposed future millennial kingdom. However, the New Testament nowhere expresses any interest in a future earthly kingdom for ethnic Israel. Rather, the 12 tribes of the new Israel are seen in Revelation 14, gathered in the presence of the Lamb to the heavenly Mount Zion. Revelation 14, verses 1-4. The promise of a land to Israel was always emblematic of the heavenly inheritance that is ours in Christ, as Hebrews 11:14-16 makes clear. This is the greater rest than the rest that Joshua gave to the Israel of his day, as Hebrews 4:8 tells us. The first phase of the distribution of the Promised Land is a recap of the land in the Transjordan that has already been allocated by Moses to 2.5 of the Israelite tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. The significance of this recap is to remind Israel of the essential unity of the Promised Land. Whether east of the Jordan River or west of it, the land belongs together as God's gift. The victories that were won under Moses in the Transjordan over Sihon and Og are part of the same divine campaign as the victories won under Joshua in the Cisjordan, the central area of the land. The unity of the 12 tribes is itself a gift from the Lord, the giver of the land. And this is important because there was often tension between these two areas, with those who lived east of the Jordan sometimes being looked down on as not part of the true Israel. A similar theme was prominent in Joshua 1:12-18, which suggests that this tension was particularly important at the time when this book was written. Two other brief notes are mentioned in passing. First, there is a hint of a lack of perseverance on the part of Israel. Yet the people of Israel did not drive out the Geshurites or the Maacathites, but Geshur and Ma'akath dwell in the midst of Israel to this day. Joshua 13:13. Later in the book, there are 3 more cases mentioned of failure to possess fully the inheritance. But the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah, could not drive out. So the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. Chapter 15, verse 63. Or, however, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but have been made to do forced labor. Chapter 16, verse 10. Or, yet the people of Manasseh could not take possession of those cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. Now when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out. Chapter 17, verses 12 to 13. Could not and did not are terms that do not sit comfortably in the book of Joshua. They don't belong as part of Israel's vocabulary. But more striking still is the phrase in the last reference, which literally says, "But the Canaanites were determined to live in that land." The Canaanites were more committed to the land than the Israelites. And even when the Israelites became stronger, they still did not obey fully and drive the Canaanites out, as the Lord had instructed them in Numbers 33, 52 to 55. But instead they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor. And as a result, the Canaanites remained as a continual source of temptation to the Israelites. Second, there's a reference to the Levites, to whom no land was allocated, because the Lord was their inheritance. They were to live off the sacrifices that were offered by Israel. Joshua 13:14. Simeon and Levi's furious rage against the Shechemites, which is recorded in Genesis 34, led to them receiving a curse from their father Jacob in his blessing of Genesis 49. Both tribes would be scattered throughout Israel. But whereas the tribe of Simeon was indeed dispersed in Judah and largely lost from sight, see Joshua 19:9, the dispersal of Levi was turned from a curse into a blessing, as they became the priestly tribe and the tribe of those who worked in the tabernacle and the temple. They had no inheritance of their own, but the Lord himself became their inheritance. Numbers 18:20. Joshua 14 to 19 addresses the distribution of the land west of the Jordan, within the Promised Land proper. The interest is not legal geography so much as theological geography. That is, this material was recorded not so much so that future claim jumpers could be dealt with appropriately, although the underlying material may have existed at one time in such form. Rather, the distribution is both the logical conclusion of the conquest and also an opportunity to show how that inheritance was or was not appropriated. It's not coincidental that the distribution begins with Caleb, Joshua 14:6 to 15, and ends with Joshua, Joshua 19:49 to 51. The 2 giants of faith who remained from the wilderness generation are still capable of teaching the younger ones a thing or two. Caleb was now 85 years old, but hardly ready for retirement. He did not use his special position to request an easy assignment, but rather he asked for his share to be in the hill country where the Anakites lived, those giants who so terrified his fellow spies on their initial exploration. Joshua 14:12, see Numbers 13:28. He wanted to take on the toughest opponents who lived in large, fortified cities. Not because of arrogant self-confidence or excess machismo. Rather, his confidence was entirely in the Lord. 5 times Caleb referred to the Lord's promise as the basis for his boldness. Verses 6, 10 twice, and 12 twice. This model behavior is underlined by the narrator, who adds, Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Joshua 14:14. Now the negative counterpart to this model of vigorous faith in Caleb and Joshua in Joshua 19:49-51 is the whining complaint of the people of Joseph in Joshua 17 verses 14-18. They came to Joshua and argued that their inheritance was too small. For the Lord has blessed us abundantly, verse 14. And Joshua's response was that if they were indeed so numerous, they should carve out for themselves additional territory from the land of the Perizzites and Rephaites, verse 15. However, the people of Joseph replied that this was not possible, since these groups had iron chariots, verse 16. For Joshua, this must have reminded him of the original 10 spies, who declared, "The land looks good, apart from the fact it's occupied by giants and can therefore never be taken." The seeds of Israel's failure to possess the land are already evident, even in the positive portrayal of the book of Joshua, seeds that will come to full flower in the book of Judges. Application questions. 1. Israel never fully possessed the promised land. How does that fit with its role as emblematic of the Christian life? 2. Those Israelites who lived west of the Jordan often looked down on those who lived to the east in the Transjordan, which was a source of tension in the community. Which Christians are you tempted to look down upon because they're not kosher? And how does that undermine proper Christian unity? 3. Why did the Levites receive no inheritance? How would that have changed the way that they lived? 4. Who do you know who's like Caleb, firm in faith, although old in years? And what can you learn from them?